Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine, the podcast about disease prevention and health promotion from the Office of Integrative Medicine and Health at the George Washington University School of Medicine and Health Sciences.
I'm Dr. Misha Kogan, Associate Professor of Medicine here at GW and Medical Director of the GW Center for Integrative Medicine.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez, the office's Administrative Director. Today we're joined by Aly Cohen, MD, FACR. She's one of the world's leading experts on environmental health and the co-author of a new book called Non-Toxic: Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World.
This book is a part of the Oxford University Press Andrew Weil Integrative Medicine Library. The book is Practical Guide to Living Healthier in Our Modern Environment. Dr. Cohen has collaborated with the Environmental Working Group, actor Fran Drescher Cancer Schmancer Group, and several others, and is a coeditor of the textbook Integrative Environmental Medicine.
Dr. Cohen is triple board certified in internal medicine, rheumatology, and integrative medicine. She helped create a continuing medical education course on endocrine disrupting chemicals and their relationship to human health. She lectures nationally on this topic to communities, academic institutions, medical schools, and podcasts like this one.
Welcome to GW Integrative Medicine podcast, Dr. Cohen.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Dr. Cohen, what got you interested in endocrine disrupting chemicals and their relationship to human health?
Well, quite frankly, I stumbled into this area of research and communication because my dog actually got really quite sick about 9 or 10 years ago. And I was a young mom, and the dog was ill. I took him to the vet. He was a golden retriever, and it turned out he had autoimmune hepatitis, which is incredibly rare for dogs, especially golden retrievers. And as I was trying, my heart was broken. I was trying to figure out what made this beautiful dog so sick. And of course, I'm an autoimmune disease specialist in training for humans. I started to unearth, unravel, open a Pandora's box of information that I had never heard about before in terms of regulation issues of all the chemicals and products that we use every day. As I was searching through his dog food, his dog toys, his tick collars, and seeing whether or not any of that made had an influence on his illness. So I did stumble into this quite haphazardly, but I do dedicate everything I do to that beautiful dog.
Aly, it's such an amazing story. I don't know if you knew, but I also personally had something similar. I got mercury poisoned from amalgams early in life. In my 20s, developed asthma out of blue, and through the medical school, working with people like yourself, it gradually led to understand myself better and detox. And so I think I can heavily relate. I think it's one of the most important topics we've covered on our podcast. So could you give us some examples of how the normal workings of our bodies are being deceived by this environmental pollutions?
Yeah, sure. I think I'll start with just a couple shocking numbers just to kind of set the stage. In the United States, due to horrendous or completely absent regulatory oversight, we have over 90,000 commercial and industrial chemicals that are in all of the products that we actually love. Our cleaning products, cosmetics, there are over 1,100 untested food additive chemicals. We have chemicals that make their way into our drinking water, either intentionally, such as chlorinated chemicals, byproducts, detergents, fluoride, or even unintentionally, which are sewage and manufacturing runoff, air pollutants that make their way into our drinking water. But we have chemicals that are antimicrobial that are marketed to us to make us healthier and safer and less laden with bacteria, when in fact they themselves actually have problems in terms of their ability to affect the human hormone system. And so that's where we stand in 2021. We have an unregulated system of chemicals. We have about 800 known endocrine disrupting chemicals, which are chemicals that have this unique ability to disrupt the normal workings of this very vulnerable human endocrine system, which is all of our hormones. And so that's just the 800 we know and are evaluated through university level third-party systems, not manufacturing. They're not required to test for these types of safety and health and hormone disruption issues before chemicals are put into the U.S. market. So how do these chemicals work? Well, it was discovered about 15, 20, 25 years ago, primarily through the work haphazardly of actually finding that plastic containers that were feeding mice were disrupting the results of studies looking at estrogens, low-level estrogens, and they couldn't figure out where the disruption came from. And it turned out it came from the bottles themselves that were feeding the mice. And so it began this journey for many researchers, and it's now international work. And quite robust, actually, through the World Health Organization, the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Obstetricians, Gynecologists, all have position statements on these chemicals and their ability to disrupt human hormones. And so human hormones, we all think of, fertility, of course. Insulin is a hormone, puberty. We go through many growth and developmental change through hormonal changes in puberty, menopause. We have hormones that control blood pressure, hormones that can control fat cells and obesity, and whether people go on to have problems with insulin resistance. Thyroid hormone is, of course, a hormone that affects metabolism. So we are just really, filled with hormones that are essential to all of the normal physiologic functions of the human body, even brain development in utero. And so what was discovered little by little, looking at different classes of chemicals, many of which are plastic chemicals, but there are also pesticides as well, that they have this ability to not just, increase or decrease, but essentially disrupt the functioning, meaning that either creating more or less of a hormone or affecting the receptors that catch that hormone at the site of where it's supposed to cause change. And so this was a really eye-opening discovery internationally, but also what's quite shocking is that these changes can happen at very, very, very low exposures, parts per billion, parts per million, parts per even trillion. And we're seeing that now, even with newer chemicals that are still coming onto the market, such as the perfluoroalkyls, which are the non-stick chemicals. Most of the work really originated with the chemical bisphenol A, BPA, which was actually taken off of the commercial market in the U.S. in 2012 due to the robust science that was discovered on its ability to affect human hormones. And it was taken out of baby bottles because of that risk in babies. But unfortunately, it is still on the market. It is one of the highest produced chemicals, largest produced chemicals worldwide. And it is still in all of the products that we really use on a day-to-day basis.
So in the time of COVID, why is it so important to avoid environmental toxins?
So what it was discovered is that even before the time of COVID is that many of these chemicals have the ability to affect the human immune system, causing inflammatory markers to increase. And this was especially true with people with chronic comorbidities or chronic diseases such as obesity, diabetes, insulin resistance, heart disease, blood pressure issues. And so we know that there's this cross-link between the endocrine system and the human immune system. They speak to each other. They're essential to connecting with each other for a variety of physiologic processes. And so what we're seeing now with COVID is that people who have chronic conditions often are more inflamed, often have, a history of increased inflammation through diet or air pollution from where they live, even certainly the personal care products and cleaning products. But that baseline level of inflammation that goes hand in hand with chronic illnesses in the United States actually sets people up for an increased or an exaggerated immune system response when it comes in contact with an outside threat such as COVID, an immune system stimulant, so to speak. And so that has been, the running, speaking points when it comes to the fact that people who actually tend to do worse with COVID exposure, meaning that they require oxygenation, ventilation, hospitalization, and even end up with death, tend to have baseline levels of inflammatory markers, poor nutrition, which often goes hand in hand with dietary, with poor diet, and can set them up for worse outcomes.
Aly, your new book, Non-Toxic Guide to Living Healthy in a Chemical World, is an amazing resource, and I sure hope all of our listeners going to get it. And it's extremely practical. I remember reading it, and there were things in there that were quite not necessarily surprising to me, but very practical. Like the certain tools that we often take for granted and we forget about certain things. Can you give our listeners an overview of how can they reduce the chemical exposure in their life based on the book? And can you sort of give a little bit of a preview of that for our listeners?
Absolutely. So, what I did with this book, and I work with my my co-author, who's extraordinary researcher who was actually largely responsible for getting bisphenol A out of baby bottles in 2012. What we decided is to really put together a book that was so easy to read, use, come back to and be able to use as a wonderful resource. And so the chapters are divided up in the way that I think most of us live our lives, right? How we eat. So a chapter on food, understanding food labels and how to reduce chemicals through processed foods and reducing those, as well as, bulking up the gut microbiome and making sure the gut is healthy, and thinking about all the things that food and medications can do to affect the gut, which is our primary immune system. People don't think of the gut as the immune system. So, we broke up chapters into food, drinking water, personal care products, home furnishings, pesticides. We have a chapter on medications just to discuss some of the very, very common medications and what they may or may not do to the human body and what to think about when seeing a physician even and what to ask. But we have a chapter on how to prepare for pregnancy, what parents and parents to be can think about when it comes to reducing exposures to chemicals, especially when it comes to the growth of a fetus, which we know is an incredibly vulnerable experience, and that the placenta does not actually protect or prevent many of these chemicals from crossing the placenta into a growing fetus. And so the book was designed to really not scare anyone off, but really to open their minds up to do things in a sequential, easy way at their own pace. It's considered a journey. I mean, I'm still 9 years into this and I'm still on my journey. And I wish I had this book 9 years ago to really dive into with all my questions. It's filled with vetted resources that are evergreen, so they are in charge of their material and can keep on top of the markets. If businesses buy each other out, we want to make sure that people are getting really good information about products and how to choose those products safely. And it also has a refrigerator tear-off sheet, which I felt very strongly about and had to actually fight pretty hard for, even though it's just a page with, perforation. But the idea was to really give people something they can look at in the refrigerator to work off of at their own pace. It's meant to empower people and to really give people options to move through these topics carefully.
So I have a personal question. I hope our listeners like it. So, I find that there are certain things in the book that really stood out to me, partially because I've heard about it, but I kind of never really went deeply into it. So the issue of perchlorate, I didn't actually know the extent of the concern. So maybe just on the example of this one, you can tell our listeners just for maybe a couple of minutes as to this one specific chemical. How do you think about this when somebody comes to you and you're potentially worried that this patient may have a toxicity exposure? How do you kind of think through this and walk the patient through the testing or no testing, detox, no detox?
Well, first of all, I try to get, and I believe every doctor should be trained in this. Hopefully this will change in the future for medical schools and residencies. But I believe we should all have a very basic environmental history. We should get an environmental history on our patients. And really what that means is, what are people eating? Where do they get their water from? What's their source of water? Is it well? Is it municipal tap or wastewater treatment plant that serves pretty much 85% of the U.S. population? Where do people live? Indoors? Are they mostly indoors? Or are they mostly outdoors with their activities and hobbies? Where do they work? And what are the exposures that may take place at work? Do they choose their own cleaning products, or can they bring in cleaning products like I do for cleaning surfaces at work, which I know are safer and less toxic? Really, I want people to think about just, number one, don't buy extra chemicals if you don't need them in your life, whether it's air fresheners, which are remarkably unhealthy and filled with phthalates, which are endocrine disruptors, candles, synthetic air fresheners, incense, fabric softeners, detergents. Mostly cleaning products are pretty avoidable. And we have a lot of do-it-yourself cleaning product recipes actually in the book. Now, when it comes to perchlorate, as you mentioned, perchlorate actually is a food wash. It's an allowable food wash on the U.S. market. And so not in organics, but in conventional foods. It's a wash that allows, to avoid, bacterial entities like salmonella, and it tends to clean the surface. It's a detergent. The problem with perchlorate, for instance, is that perchlorate likes to get into the thyroid gland and sit in the little transporters in the thyroid gland that normally hold iodine, which should be part of our everyday diet. Anthropologically, we developed with having iodine in our diet from fresh seafood and some other components, beans, cranberries, and yogurt. But a lot of us don't eat as healthy as we should. And then we had iodine was added to our food and bread. That has since been removed. And then a lot of us are cooking with sea salt, which does not have iodine. So iodine is quite protective, and you don't need a lot of it. But perchlorate competes with the same locations on the thyroid that iodine typically would sit and kind of maintain health. And so the problems with perchlorate is that, most people don't even know that it's on their food, just like they don't know that there's over 1,100, allowable chemicals in processed foods that are untested or not required to have any testing before going into their food. And so what I talk about with my patients is I kind of do a general overview of the main things that get into their body: food, water, cosmetics that we put on our skin, personal care products, but also feminine care products. I think people don't often think about feminine care products as a real risk to human health. But in fact, intravaginally, when we use tampons for an entire lifetime and we start young, as young women, you really want to watch the chemicals that are being absorbed in that area, because as we know in medicine, we utilize that route to get estrogens into the body, and it's quite efficient. So you can imagine that many of the chemicals, synthetic, pesticides, chlorinated chemicals for cotton, phthalates, antimicrobial chemicals, fragrances, they all are put into feminine care products. And so I go through all of the areas that touch their body, go into their body and some of their habits. And we start really easy. We start with just trying to cut back on purchasing many of these chemicals, mostly cleaning products. I give my patients the website for them to look up their cosmetics or use the Healthy Living app. It's an app it's for free. And I do this with my high school students as well. We all download the Healthy Living app and they can look up cosmetics, choose better options that are less, toxic. And so really it's just about teaching people how to do it themselves. It's the fish and the fishing rod story. I want my patients to have, the fishing rod to learn how to keep on top of products, changes in the market, and to really think judiciously about what they put in, on, and around their bodies.
That's great. You brought up a couple of resources, and maybe you can tell our listeners a little bit more about the Smart Human website, your website, as well as maybe any other resources you want to mention.
Sure. So out of frustration, of course, when I was on this journey early on, I really couldn't believe what I was reading. So I started to, as I learned and started to solidify the information and really, vet out this information with really reputable sources, I began a platform on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also the website called The Smart Human. So it's thesmarthuman.com. And it's filled with podcasts and radio shows and blog posts and basic, really, interesting environmental health information. But then also Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, I post 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, typically. And I share, great articles, but also give people the punchline, in bulleted form, which is the way I like to learn when you're busy or you have work or you're a mom and you don't have a lot of time. It's really nice to get bulleted information with high yield, tips and recommendations. And so I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I also have a podcast that I recently started called The Smart Human Podcast. In fact, Misha, Dr. Kogan, you were a lovely guest on my podcast. So I really appreciated that conversation, talking about medical marijuana. I thought that was quite an important topic, and you did a great job with it. So, really, I'm just trying to get this information out. I don't sell anything. I don't endorse anything, just to, really emphasize the legitimacy of this information. And of course, I'm trying to share this information with schools nationally, putting together programs for high school students and college students, and really teach them young that what they do, throughout their whole lives, but also maybe even before becoming pregnant, making them think before they vote for issues that affect their bodies, such as, environmental topics and politicians who support what they believe in. I want them to be quite thoughtful. Other resources that I will recommend to your listeners is Environmental Working Group, ewg.org. They are scattered throughout this book as a resource for a variety of topics, whether it's water filter guide, whether it's the cosmetic page to look up cosmetics and personal care products and see which ones are safer or less safe, according to their toxicologists. And their app called Healthy Living is quite helpful. So I also use the NRDC, I'm trying to remember, National Resource Defense Fund. And that's a wonderful resource. But we have tons of them in the book, and people will be able to look up couches without flame retardants from a very reputable website, and just a variety of groups that just get it right.
That is going to be a wonderful resource. We'll include a lot of those links in the show notes.
Dr. Cohen, I can't stop wondering that I'm a very optimistic person by nature, but this is one topic that concerns me probably probably the most in the entire sector of healthcare. I don't see any movement towards decreasing total toxic load, and I don't really see enough political interest in this topic to sort of reverse the trend of ever increasing number of chemicals. But, I don't want to just ask your opinion about the future, but I want to ask your opinion about how would you design a potential fix of the issue? Or if you were to sort of be in the power, what would be the steps you think you'd take to really reverse this terrible trend?
Well, it's interesting. I myself am a bit frustrated, and I've decided that instead of being frustrated, I would focus my energy where I think I could have, the most impact. People like Environmental Working Group and the president of EWG, Ken Cook, and many of his colleagues have been fighting the good fight up on Capitol Hill, testifying against various chemicals that are infiltrating our water systems. We have to think about the rollbacks that have gone on in our environment, because what happens in air pollution affects our water systems. All these chemicals do land on bodies of water that will make their way into municipal wastewater systems that become our drinking water. When we, lay off of, manufacturing and dumping, we get contamination of local bodies of water that become our drinking water. When we, roll back emissions on cars, when we don't require testing of new chemicals before they go to market, which at this point we have at least 15 new polymers that go to market every week. We have 1,000 every year. And we've grandfathered in over 62,000 chemicals that never got tested, even on the most basic level. So I think, the problem is that we don't have legislation that's really tough because we are in many ways bullied by the food industry and the food lobbyists. And it's a really screwed up system. I will say that there are a lot of good people working to, right these wrongs. And we're starting to see some of these, regulatory issues come back into play in terms of air quality emissions, climate change, regulations moving forward. I think that's quite important when it comes to chemicals and environmental health. I long since said that my best impact, my greatest impact will be to teach people to do things for themselves. And as my mother used to say, do everything for yourself. Don't wait for others. And in fact, really, if we were to wait for our government to really protect us on these issues, we're going to just continue to get sicker and sicker. And as a physician who treats autoimmune disease and other diseases, chronic illness, I'm seeing sicker and sicker people at younger and younger ages. We may live longer, but we're living sicker. And so, it really started to get to me in quite a deep way. And I said, you know what, I'm going to write a book. I'm going to do a platform. I'm going to teach high school, and I'm going to try to get this into people's hands so that they can feel empowered to do this for themselves. And really, it's been quite a groundswell, and people are really interested into this information because they are getting sick and their relatives are getting sick. So hopefully people will start to see that they can do a lot for themselves and reduce body burden of these chemicals and reduce their risk for developing both acute and chronic illnesses.
Well, thank you so much. I'm glad you ended on somewhat of a positive note. And thank you so much for coming. And I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Cohen, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me.
This is the GW Integrative Medicine podcast from the GW Office of Integrative Medicine and Health.
I'm Dr. Misha Kogan.
And I'm Janet Rodriguez. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.